So imagine you have this classical piano-playing Hollywood comedian,
Right.
like a guy who is literally hanging out with Adam Sandler. He's starring in sitcoms produced by Vince Vaughn.
His picture's up on the wall next to Chris Rock.
Exactly. He is at the absolute center of the mainstream cultural apparatus, you know?
Yeah.
The trajectory is completely set. The fame, the money, the influence, it's all locked in.
It's a done deal.
Yeah. And then this massive catastrophic rupture happens. He is ousted from that mainstream, just entirely unpersoned in the entertainment industry.
Overnight, basically.
Overnight. And where does he end up? He ends up chopping wood and milking cows on a farm in Idaho.
Yeah, building what he actually calls an Amish classroom for his kids.
It's wild. Welcome, everyone. If you are a learner who, loves pulling apart complex, messy, fascinating stories, you are in the right place today.
Definitely.
Because our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this highly unconventional, deeply philosophical, and frankly, incredibly provocative life story. We've been going through this massive energy transcript.
It is a dense transcript.
So dense. And the subject is Owen Benjamin.
But before we go any further, we really have to lay down the absolute parameters for this conversation.
Yes, very important.
Because the source material we are examining today contains highly politically charged viewpoints. I mean, incredibly controversial claims.
Right.
We are talking about explosive commentary spanning culture, gender identity, institutions, global politics, even the basic nature of language itself.
That is a critical point to establish right at the top. So to you, listening right now, our role as your guides today is to impartially report on and analyze Benjamin's worldview exactly as is presented in this text.
Exactly.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints. We are not taking sides on any of these highly charged issues. Our objective is purely analytical, right? We just want to synthesize the arguments he's making.
We're breaking down the philosophy behind them, converting the ideas from the original source material. We are the guides to the text, nothing more.
Nothing more, nothing less. And man, the text gives us a lot to navigate.
It really does. I mean, we're going to examine his whole philosophy of comedy, which he views as this critical pressure relief valve for society.
Right. And then we'll break down the anatomy of his cancellation, like when the cultural zeitgeist just violently shifted beneath his feet.
Then we'll get into his intense, almost metaphysical critique of what he calls societal wizardry.
The manipulation of language, that part is crazy.
It is. And finally, we'll unpack his ultimate transition into an honor culture grounded in, manual labor, duty, and fatherhood.
So let's start with his origins, because they completely defy the standard comedian trope.
Yeah, they really do.
We are so used to that tragic clown narrative, right? The comedian who gets on stage to spill their guts because they desperately need validation from strangers.
Like they didn't get enough hugs as a kid.
Exactly. Benjamin's background is the polar opposite of that. He viewed comedy strictly as a craft. I mean, his father sang opera and taught rhetoric.
Literally the art of speaking to capture human interest.
Right, and his mother taught children's literature.
It's this foundation of extreme high structure. And that structural obsession started super early. I mean, he was playing classical piano by the time he was, 2 or 3 years old?
2 or 3, yeah.
And he even mentions that he actively rejects jazz music, which is fascinating.
Wait, really? Why does he reject jazz?
Well, his rationale is that he asks, why would you enjoy breaking the rules that make things beautiful?
Wow. I found that detail so revealing, because classical music is all about precision, hitting the exact right note at the exact right time to produce a guaranteed emotional resonance.
Right, whereas jazz is about exploration, bending the rules.
Yeah.
Finding the accident.
Yeah, and by rejecting the accident, he's basically telling us that he views art as a rigid architecture.
Right.
And he brought that exact same, autistic focus to the job of comedy.
Totally. He incorporated music into his sets, he landed the sitcoms, he toured, but he treated it like a carpenter framing a house.
He explicitly says he ignored politics entirely during his rise. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was literally just trying to build a structurally perfect joke.
Which requires an incredibly thick skin and a really deep understanding of human psychology.
Which he got in a very weird way.
Oh, a bizarre crucible. When he was a teenager, he worked 9 hours a day at a Renaissance festival.
Doing what?
Not playing the lute or anything. He was the guy locked in the stocks.
Oh my God.
Yeah. A local gypsy character would collect money and patrons would pay to throw tomatoes at Benjamin while he insulted them.
9 hours a day getting pelted with fruit.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd learn a lot about human reflexes in that environment. And he realized something profound about vulnerability there.
What was that?
He noticed that if he attacked people based on what they believed was objectively true about themselves, it completely failed.
Oh, right. Like if a guy is 6'5" and built like a linebacker, and Benjamin insults his height.
The guy just laughs. It doesn't hurt. But if Benjamin hunted for their specific hidden insecurities, like their actual point of pride, the reaction was physical. He said if he mentally dismantled someone by hitting their pride, they would lose their coordination. They couldn't even aim the tomatoes anymore. They'd just throw them angrily into the dirt.
He had to find the gap between who they pretended to be and who they actually were.
Exactly.
He gives a great example using himself, actually. He says if someone makes fun of him for eating too many cookies because the stress of having 4 kids is getting to him, he would mentally spiral.
Because it hits a real insecurity.
Right, his discipline. But if someone mocked him for his pants not being a fancy enough designer brand, he wouldn't care at all. So he learned to hunt for pride.
And this leads directly to his core philosophy of language. He argues that words themselves have absolutely no inherent intention.
Right, they're just tools.
Yeah, he uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. He says a word without intention is like a minivan filled with lollipops.
A minivan filled with lollipop.
Right, it's just an object. You cannot put human consciousness into an inanimate object like a word. Like a gun doesn't kill people, a person does.
And a word doesn't hurt people. The intention behind the wielder does.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more. Because words are just neutral tools, he believes that the comedy club functions as this societal pressure relief valve.
Right. Society builds up all this tension, all this trauma and absurdity.
And the comedian takes those heavy, terrifying concepts, packages them in a joke, and discharges the tension through laughter.
I look at it like a societal immune system.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, when you get a vaccine, you're being exposed to a small, controlled dose of an offensive pathogen, right?
Right.
The comedy club is essentially injecting a controlled dose of offensive ideas into the cultural bloodstream. It forces the audience to build antibodies.
They laugh, they process it, and the culture becomes resilient.
Exactly. And if you sterilize the environment completely and refuse to let the society encounter any offensive germs, the host body becomes incredibly fragile.
That immune system analogy maps perfectly onto his argument, especially regarding how he treated marginalized groups in his act.
Yeah, he believed that avoiding making fun of a specific group is actually an act of supreme cruelty.
Which sounds counterintuitive today.
It does.
Yeah.
But he says if you have a veteran friend who lost a leg or a friend in a wheelchair, and you refuse to roast them the way you roast everyone else, you're treating them as subhuman.
You're pitying them.
Right, and pity exiles them from the tribe.
He comes from an honor culture mentality where testing someone's weakness through humor is how you invite them into strength.
It's very much a, let's look at this absurdity together so we can survive it kind of comedy.
And that immune system approach was working perfectly for his career. I mean, he was crushing it.
Yeah.
But then the host body suddenly decided the vaccine was a poison.
The zeitgeist shifted. Hard.
Yeah. The culture in Hollywood and left-wing circles suddenly, in his words, doubled down and developed tunnel vision.
He locates this shift right around Obama's second term, and he describes the phenomenon as ghostwriting.
I love that term, like stepping out of a moving car and just letting it roll.
Exactly. People just lost their tether to objective reality and let pure ideology steer the vehicle. And he saw this happening specifically within his own domain of comedy.
The focus shifted entirely from humor to victim consciousness.
Yeah, he brings up Sarah Silverman. He recalls an era where she had this very edgy, hilarious joke about the movie 300 and how, quote-unquote, gay it was out of 10.
Right, it was just an expertly crafted, funny observation.
But then suddenly all of those hardcore, edgy comedians became intensely serious. They stopped trying to be funny and started trying to be socially righteous.
He calls it the death of the jester.
He does. He recounts watching a new wave comedy special where a woman spent a huge portion of her set speaking about a severe personal trauma.
I think it was sexual assault, right?
Yeah. And the audience, sitting in a comedy club and conditioned to relieve tension, nervously laughed.
Because that's what you do in a comedy club.
Right. But the comedian scolded them. She demanded they stop laughing.
Which, to Benjamin, breaks the fundamental contract of the room. I mean, you are demanding the relief and attention of the comedy space without actually delivering the mechanism of relief. the joke.
But his critique goes deeper than just bad stagecraft. He argues that preventing the laughter actively harms the victim.
How so?
Well, let's break down the psychology of it. When a comedian puts someone's suffering into perspective through humor, it shatters their isolation.
Right. The laughter of the crowd tells the victim, we see this, it's absurd, it's terrible, but you are not alone.
We are surviving it together. But when you remove the comedian's ability to contextualize that suffering through humor, you're trapping the victim in a sterile room with their own trauma.
You increase their isolation.
Exactly.
But the real breaking point for him, like the moment he permanently took off the jester hat, was the cultural introduction of transgender children.
Yeah, that was blind.
He considered himself a libertarian regarding adult sexuality, like whatever consenting adults do is their business. But he viewed the concept of a trans kid as a fundamental nightmare.
Because in his framework, a child cannot consent to life-altering medical or social transitions. And he felt the label inherently grafts adult sexuality onto a minor.
This is where his rigid, structural view of reality clashed permanently with the shifting culture.
He just couldn't reconcile what he was being asked to accept with what his eyes saw. He uses a very basic analogy tied to his classical roots.
Oh, the pink shirt thing?
Yeah, he says, I play classical music and I own a pink shirt. Am I a girl?
Right. For him, adopting the new terminology wasn't just being polite. It was a total breakdown of language and reality.
And remember, he views his job as tethering jokes to absolute truth. If the carpenter compromises on the fact that wood is solid, he can't build the house.
If Benjamin compromises on what he sees as fundamental biological truth, he felt he would lose his ability to do comedy entirely.
So he didn't just quietly disagree or politely decline auditions?
Yeah, he went on Twitter and started detonating bridges, just blowing them up.
He specifically mentions calling out an NPR personality who was publicly discussing their 5-year-old child in a transgender context. Benjamin publicly accused the host of child abuse.
He also went after the Sackler family over Purdue Pharma and the opioid crisis.
He took his sharpest rhetorical weapons and aimed them directly at the institutions he felt were destroying reality.
And the retaliation from the system was instant and total and completely unsparing. I mean, his powerhouse agency, CAA, dropped him.
His manager dropped him.
And the cultural mechanisms of cancellation really reveal themselves here, because it wasn't just corporate risk management, it was deeply personal.
Oh, yeah. People whose weddings he had participated in, people he had worn a yarmulke for to respect their faith, instantly alienated themselves from him.
They publicly labeled him a man of hate. But the irony he points out regarding his excommunication is incredibly revealing about institutional morality.
You're talking about the manager versus the agent.
Yes. His manager, who was just a practical business guy, didn't give him a moral lecture. The manager just said, look, buddy, I don't know what to do. All these guys are calling me. I have to let you go.
It was pure math.
Pure math. But an agent from CAA, a guy Benjamin, claims he had personally witnessed doing ketamine on a toilet at a Hollywood party.
Which is wild.
Suddenly, this guy positioned himself as a high priest of morality. He gives Benjamin this stern lecture on how evil and harmful his words were.
The ketamine on the toilet detail is just too perfect.
It really is. It highlights the hypocrisy. Like, why do institutions, particularly in Hollywood, which historically thrives on deviance, drug use, and boundary pushing, suddenly demand absolute ideological purity?
Because when an industry loses its foundation in objective truth, or even in objective craftsmanship, it has to replace it with something to maintain cohesion.
And it replaces it with rigid dogma.
Exactly. And any heresy against that dogma must be swiftly punished, regardless of the personal, behind-closed-doors morality of the inquisitors.
The guy doing ketamine in the bathroom isn't defending morality.
No, he's defending the current ideological architecture that keeps his paychecks clearing.
Wow. And the excommunication didn't stop at Hollywood elites. Independent theaters started canceling his self-booked tours. His ability to feed his family was under direct assault.
So you're Benjamin. You lose your agents, your income stream, your social circle, literally overnight.
Most people would spiral into absolute psychological collapse.
And he did. But the text reveals a massive disconnect between what was happening in his head and what was happening in his physical environment.
He describes this as the illusion of loss.
Psychologically, he was melting down. He felt like he was dying on a hill, bleeding out, losing everything he'd worked decades to build.
But if you zoomed out and looked at his physical reality, the picture was entirely different. He wasn't in a gutter in Los Angeles.
No, he was living in upstate New York. He was outside in the fresh air, chopping wood with his brother.
He was spending time with combat veterans in a program they called Treehab. doing hard, exhausting physical labor to sweat out opiate addictions.
He had a wife he loved deeply, and they were welcoming a new child into the world. His physical, tangible reality was more wholesome, grounded, and life-affirming than it had ever been.
He notes the absurdity of his own panic. He says, I know losing dollars sucks, but breath, taste, your love, you've lost nothing.
Yet the human mind, when faced with an invisible, systemic rejection, desperately searches for a central orchestrator.
Which is such a recognizable human instinct. You get fired, you want to know which boss signed the paper.
You get canceled, you want to know who held the meeting.
So he went hunting for the cabal. He admits he cycled through every demographic. First he blamed the Democrats, then he blamed Muslims.
Then he blamed China, raging about the people who manufactured his phone. Then he blamed Jewish people. He fell deeply into what he calls the identity trap.
But his own commitment to observing reality eventually broke him out of it, right?
Yeah, he realized that whenever he tried to pin the blame on one specific group, his daily life would present him with individuals from that group who completely contradicted the narrative.
Right. He says he would blame the Jewish community, but then he'd interact with his Jewish neighbors who were just normal, kind people complaining about their broken air conditioners.
He even invented an absurd term, deli Jews, to compartmentalize the nice people from his grand conspiracy.
Eventually, the cognitive dissonance just became too much. The conspiracy theory failed the test of his physical reality.
And this leads to his most profound realization about how modern society operates. There is no central orchestrator in a smoke-filled room pulling levers to ruin Owen Benjamin's life.
He realizes it is a swarm, a fractal.
Let's pause and define that, because a fractal is a very specific mathematical concept.
Right. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself exactly at every scale. Like if you look at a tiny piece of a fern, it looks exactly like the whole fern.
So when he says the swarm is fractal, what he means regarding human groupthink is that the behavior of the mob isn't commanded from the top down.
It's a repeating pattern.
Exactly. It's a repeating pattern of temperament that exists at every level of society. The same ideological conformity and fear of being ostracized that you see in a local PTA meeting in a town of 900 people.
Is the exact same pattern of behavior operating in a corporate boardroom at CAA or on a national news broadcast?
It's a collective evil based on shared behaviors and unquestioned assumptions, not a coordinated plot.
And realizing that the swarm is just a decentralized pattern of human weakness actually pulled him out of his victimhood. It shifted the locus of control back to him.
He came to the spiritual conclusion that indulging in despair over the swarm is actually a sin.
His analogy for despair is incredibly poignant here.
The dinner one.
Yeah. He says that feeling despair and wanting to destroy your own life is like your wife spending all afternoon making you a beautiful, elaborate dinner. And when she sets it on the table, you are so angry about something that happened at work that you just smash the plates on the floor.
It's pure ingratitude.
Life, breath, the ability to chop wood, these are gifts. Giving into despair is spitting in the face of the Creator who gave you the gift.
And part of escaping that despair was finding a strange, liberating power in admitting when he was wrong. This becomes his armor against the swarm.
He famously and publicly admitted he was completely wrong about supporting the Iraq War. His new operating motto became, I might be wrong, but I'm not lying.
That is a massive distinction. Being wrong is a failure of calculation. Lying is a failure of morality.
And he contrasts his willingness to be wrong with the behavior of institutions, whose entire funding, prestige, and pride depend on never admitting fault.
His critique of theoretical physics here is wild.
Oh, the dark matter thing. It perfectly illustrates his point, though. He argues that physicists created these massive, elegant gravitational equations, but when they looked at the actual universe, the math didn't match the observable reality.
Right.
Instead of admitting the math was wrong, which would destroy their pride in their tenure, he claims they just invented dark matter.
They basically said, our math is perfect. Therefore, 95% of the universe must be made of invisible, unmeasurable stuff that makes our equations work.
He aims the exact same critique at evolutionary biology. He cites writers who claim that the mathematical probability of random mutations successfully permeating an entire population is statistically zero.
But, according to Benjamin, the scientific community clings to the theory out of institutional trauma and pride.
Now, whether you listening right now agree with his scientific conclusions about dark matter or evolution is secondary to the psychological observation he is making.
Which is what?
that human beings, especially those who have built their entire identity on being the smartest people in the room, will literally invent invisible realities rather than suffer the shame of admitting they were wrong.
It's the ultimate intellectual fragility. Imagine spending your whole life calling everyone in Middle America deplorable mouth breathers, and then you have to admit that the guy who changes your oil has a better grasp on reality than you do.
The ego simply cannot survive it. And that pride, he argues, creates a culture that actively incentivizes tearing others down rather than building yourself up. He calls it chutzpah culture.
He illustrates this with a famous Russian proverb. The peasants in a village are all given cows. But the first impulse of some peasants isn't to figure out how to breed their cow or yield more milk.
Their first impulse is to go kill their neighbor's cow in the middle of the night.
Because there are two ways to win a race. You can run faster, or you can break the other guy's legs.
The swarm operates by breaking legs. And he realized that the mechanism that forces so many people to comply with the swarm, especially in Hollywood, isn't true belief. It's debt.
Fame and money are just raw energy. When a young actor suddenly gets $1 million, they don't buy their freedom. They immediately put a down payment on an $8 million house in the Hollywood Hills.
I want you, the listener, to think about your own life right now. Think about your mortgage or your car payment. How much of your daily compliance at your job, nodding along to corporate jargon you know is absurd, or biting your tongue in a meeting, is driven purely by the terror of losing the ability to pay that debt?
For Hollywood stars, that terror is magnified 100-fold. The debt turns them into compliance slaves.
They have to go along with the swarm's ideology. They have to post the right black square on Instagram. They have to condemn the right people.
Because if they get canceled, the $8 million house goes into foreclosure. They are trapped.
So if the swarm is a decentralized pattern driven by pride and enforced by debt traps, what is the actual mechanism they use to program the population? How do you get millions of people to behave in this fractal pattern?
Benjamin argues the control mechanism is language, and he gives it a very specific name: wizardry.
Wizardry. This concept brings his entire upbringing in rhetoric full circle.
It does. He makes a stark differentiation between a philosopher and a wizard. Someone like Aristotle uses rhetoric to aim at the truth, to illuminate reality so people can make better decisions.
But a wizard uses rhetoric purely for deception. A wizard intentionally hides information so that you make a decision that benefits them at your expense.
And their primary tool is the spell. Benjamin argues that words are like raw electricity. As we established earlier with the minivan of lollipops, words don't have inherent intentions.
But wizards charge these words with emotion, turning them into sigils.
Let's define sigil. A sigil is an inscribed or painted symbol considered to have magical power. In the corporate world, the ultimate sigil is a logo, like the Nike swoosh.
You see that simple curved line and your brain instantly floods with concepts of athletic greatness, perseverance, and status.
Nike has spent billions of dollars charging that shape with electricity. Wizards do the exact same thing with words to bypass our critical thinking and spike our emotional reflexes.
He points to advertising slogans as low-level spells. Obey your thirst, or once you pop, you can't stop.
He notes how dark that second one is. It sounds uncomfortably close to heroin addiction.
Yeah, it's a spell designed to appeal to our lowest, most compulsive nature. But the spells get much more insidious when applied to public policy and culture. Take the phrase, safe and effective.
A phrase we heard endlessly during the pandemic. Benjamin points out that safe and effective is a linguistic spell because it is a meaningless statement without the required qualifiers.
Safe for whom and effective at what?
Exactly. By repeating the chant, the wizards bypass the analytical brain that would normally ask for the clinical trial data and instead speak directly to the mammalian brain that just wants to feel secure.
They weaponize identity labels too. Words like tolerant or patriot, depending on which tribe you belong to, those words are supercharged.
If someone calls you intolerant, the spell is designed to make you panic and conform.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Benjamin realized his biological function as a comedian was to discharge those spells.
He tells a brilliant story about messing with Alex Jones. He knew that for Jones, the word patriot was a sacred, highly charged sigil.
So Benjamin would go on Jones's show and playfully tell him he wasn't a real patriot, or tease him with absurd accusations.
And because they were friends, Jones would burst out laughing.
By making it a joke, Benjamin grounded the electricity of the word. He took the terrifying mystical power out of the spell and turned it back into a regular word.
Laughter breaks the spell.
But Benjamin's theory of wizardry doesn't stop at advertising and political rhetoric. He pushes it into an almost metaphysical realm that he calls twilight language.
Twilight language refers to names and coincidences in reality that seem almost supernatural in their irony, suggesting a layer of reality that is mocking us.
I have to admit, I'm highly skeptical of this part, but his examples are wild.
They are pretty strange.
He points out that the guy who executed the largest Ponzi scheme in history, making off with billions of dollars, was literally named Bernie Madoff. Madoff.
And the woman who led a massive cultural shift in daytime television and gender norms was Ellen DeGeneres. DeGeneres.
The two most famous athletes who miraculously survived the AIDS epidemic at its height were Magic Johnson and Greg Louganis.
It sounds like a simulation glitching. Now, a skeptic would easily dismiss this as pure confirmation bias. We ignore the millions of names that don't match their destiny and fixate on the three that do.
But for Benjamin, the psychological utility of noticing twilight language is that it keeps you awake. It forces you to constantly look for the trick.
And the biggest trick, the ultimate spell of the modern world, is the illusion of something for nothing.
Abracadabra. Speaking value into existence without labor, he notes that fiat currency literally translates to let it be done.
The government prints money into existence through debt, backed by absolutely nothing but the spell of collective belief.
He compares fiat currency to doing cocaine, which he brilliantly terms biological usury.
That's such a great phrase.
I need to understand the mechanics of that, though. How is a drug usury?
Well, usury is traditionally the practice of lending money at unreasonably high interest rates. Benjamin says cocaine is biological usury because it gives you a massive, unearned spike of energy and confidence right now, for free.
It's something for nothing.
But the biological bank will collect its debt. The toll it exacts on your dopamine receptors, your heart, and your mental stability over the next few days or years is a predatory interest rate.
Fiat currency does the exact same thing to an economy. It gives a massive boom of spending power today, but exacts the heavy toll of inflation and societal degradation tomorrow.
And this brings us to his interpretation of The Wizard of Oz, which he views less as a children's story and more as a massive, deliberate truth drop about our economic and social systems.
It's all right there in the open.
The symbology is incredibly precise. The yellow brick road represents the gold standard. It leads Dorothy to the Emerald City, which represents the greenback, paper fiat money.
But it's crucial to remember that in L. Frank Baum's original book, Dorothy's slippers were not ruby red, they were silver.
Silver and gold.
Yeah.
Real, tangible value.
And what happens when they finally meet the great and powerful wizard? He's just a frail guy hiding behind a curtain, using smoke, mirrors, and loud machinery to scare people into submission.
He has no actual power.
And look at how he solves their problems. He doesn't actually give them what they need. He gives them trinkets that alter their perception.
He gives the scarecrow a diploma, a piece of paper, and suddenly the scarecrow thinks he's intelligent. He gives the lion a medal, and suddenly the lion thinks he's brave.
The wizard manages perception through symbols because he lacks the power to grant actual virtue.
This forces Benjamin to grapple with a deep theological distinction between sin and wickedness. He believes we all sin. Sin is just human weakness.
Eating too many cookies because you're stressed, losing your temper with your kids, getting drunk, that's sin. It's failing to hit the mark.
But wickedness is entirely different. Wickedness is not weakness. Wickedness is the intentional, premeditated hatred of beauty.
It is the desire to destroy innocence and the systemic, cold-blooded deception of human beings for personal gain.
Wizards operate in the realm of wickedness. The guy who runs the Ponzi scheme isn't committing a sin of weakness. He is executing a wicked spell to steal the labor and lifeblood of others.
He is building a system on infinite debt and imaginary electricity. So the ultimate question becomes, how do you escape a society that is entirely built on wizardry, debt traps, and linguistic spells?
Because you can't out-argue a wizard who controls the language.
For Owen Benjamin, the answer was radical but simple. You physically leave the realm.
Which brings us to his complete physical and spiritual flight from the matrix of wizardry, seeking refuge in what he calls honor culture and a return to the land.
But the journey wasn't a single jump. It was staggered. He first moved his family from Los Angeles to Saranac Lake, New York, a tiny town near where his brother lived.
He figured getting out of the city would solve the problem.
But he quickly discovered that the fractal nature of the swarm meant that even in a town of 900 people, the local power structures demanded compliance.
He performed a large local comedy show, told a joke that offended some local sensibilities, and the community leaders demanded he issue a public apology to keep the peace.
And Benjamin absolutely refused.
And it wasn't just him being a stubborn comedian protecting a joke. He refused because he wasn't actually sorry. He believed that issuing a false apology to appease the mob is a form of spiritual usury.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that. In an honor culture, your word is your only true currency.
If you tell a lie, even a polite lie, to smooth things over, you are inflating and devaluing your own currency.
Benjamin reasoned that if he lied to the town just to make them stop yelling at him, he would destroy the value of his word.
And if his word has no value, how could his wife ever trust him when he apologized to her in the privacy of their home?
He would be trading his spiritual integrity for temporary social comfort. That is the definition of a bad trade. In an honor culture, boundaries are sacred. If you say no, it means no.
He contrasts this sharply with the inverted wizard culture. In his framework of honor culture, the hierarchy of authority is clear. God at the top, then man, then government, then corporation at the bottom.
But in the inverted modern world, the hierarchy is completely flipped. Corporations rule the government manages the man, and God is entirely replaced by the pursuit of dollars.
To avoid causing endless friction for his brother in this small town, he packs up and moves again, this time to his wife's hometown.
And shortly after they arrive, the COVID-19 pandemic hits. And for Benjamin, the pandemic measures weren't about public health or a virus. They were the ultimate global spell of compliance training.
He views the masking mandates through the lens of psychological torture. He explicitly references the famous Star Trek, The Next Generation episode, Chain of Command.
Oh, where Captain Picard is captured and tortured by a Cardassian interrogator.
Right. The interrogator shines 4 bright lights in Picard's face and demands he say there are 5 lights. It isn't about the lights, it's about breaking the prisoner's tether to reality.
If you can force a man to deny what his own eyes see, you own his mind completely.
Benjamin viewed forcing healthy people to wear cloth masks in the exact same way. It was an exercise in saying there are 5 lights.
He believed every yes to an arbitrary mandate was moving a person one step closer to breaking their own spirit. But he observed something crucial about why people were complying.
He believed people only complied because they were trapped in the debt loop we discussed earlier.
They were terrified of losing their jobs, defaulting on their mortgages, losing their health care.
So he actively sought out a geographical location where people weren't wearing masks. He deduced that a maskless population was a debt-free population.
Or at least a population that valued their bodily autonomy more than their credit score. That search led him and his family to Sandpoint, Idaho.
He buys 10 acres of land and a barn and starts acquiring cows, goats, and alpacas. He is physically manifesting his exit from the system.
But the wizards are still pursuing him. The swarm is still trying to cut off his lifeblood. He loses access to Airbnb, which he was relying on for income, forcing him to sell a property.
He gets completely kicked off traditional payment processors like PayPal and Patreon. He is being systematically starved of digital resources.
And this is where his philosophy of persistence is fertile really shines. It's a brilliant play on resistance is futile. Instead of resisting the system, he just persists in creating value outside of it.
The story of how he survives this is incredible. He gets kicked off the payment processors, his income drops to 0, and he's intensely stressed.
He calls his buddy a jazz musician, the exact kind of musician he used to mock for breaking the rules.
And his buddy just says, "Hey man, stop stressing, let's just record an album." So Benjamin sits down at his piano and records a classical music album.
And the market responds. The album hits the Billboard charts for classical music. Because he established that undeniable level of craft, local people start asking him for piano lessons.
Suddenly, the guy who is unpersoned by Hollywood is making a living teaching classical piano to kids while living on a farm in Idaho.
It is the ultimate proof of concept for his worldview. By stepping entirely outside the wizard's financial matrix, he found a more authentic, localized way to sustain his family.
And living on the land reframed his entire perspective on labor. He was out there chopping wood, clearing brush, building walking paths through the forest, and he stopped seeing these tasks as chores.
He began viewing manual labor as a form of non-ceasing prayer. He talks about connecting to the logos.
In philosophy and theology, the logos is the divine reason or order implicit in the cosmos. Benjamin argues that when you are doing something beautiful, when you are creating symmetry, or caring for creation by clearing a dead tree so a new one can grow, you are aligning yourself with that divine order.
Toiling is prayer. That is a beautiful concept. And this rural setting fundamentally changed how he viewed humanity itself.
He had this realization about the difference between city life and country life. In the city, we are subconsciously conditioned to see other humans as a burden.
They crowd the subway, they take up the table you want at the coffee shop, they cause traffic. Other people are obstacles to your comfort.
But out in the country, on a farm, a person is an incredible asset. If you need to dig a massive ditch to lay a pipe or raise a barn wall, another human being showing up in your driveway is an absolute godsend.
The environment dictates the value of human life.
That mindset shift led directly to the creation of what he calls his Amish classroom. He and his wife, Amy, started homeschooling their 4 boys.
And the results, according to his framework, were phenomenal because the kids aren't cordoned off in artificial, age-segregated peer groups staring at screens.
They are integrated into the daily life, labor, and problem-solving of the family unit. They see their parents working the land, cooking, building.
He notes that the younger boys pick up complex skills like playing the violin or practicing jujitsu almost through osmosis, simply because they are watching the older ones do it in a functional, integrated environment.
Which brings us to the ultimate evolution of his worldview. We see him balancing this extreme, newfound reverence for duty with a wildly permanent, almost comical skepticism of the outside world.
In this agrarian environment, his understanding of duty deepens significantly. He looks at his animals and his children not as possessions, but as his dominion.
You cannot abuse them because they reflect back your own responsibility. A father's job is to protect and provide, but equally important, to maintain a firm, immovable boundary so they grow properly, much like a trellis guides a vine.
But the outside world still managed to intrude on his sanctuary in a terrifying way. Someone, likely a detractor from his online presence, anonymously called Child Protective Services on his home.
For a father whose entire existence is now built around protecting his family from the system, inviting agents of the state to his door was the ultimate nightmare.
He describes pacing the floor, absolutely terrified, dropping to his knees and praying for strength.
The way he defeated that fear is incredibly telling about his spiritual growth. He realized that the panic was an attempt to control the uncontrollable.
He broke the spell of fear by accepting that he is not God. He is just a caretaker who has been given the temporary honor of looking after these children.
He recognized that if he let fear and despair dictate his reactions, if he acted out of panic and anger toward the social workers, the wizards would win.
They would have successfully used his love for his children to break his spirit and force him into a mistake. By surrendering the illusion of ultimate control while maintaining his daily duty, he neutralized the threat.
His wife, Amy, was a massive grounding anchor for him during this period of intense pressure. When he was spiraling over legal threats, terrified he was going to lose the farm, the land, and his ability to provide, she completely dismantled his panic.
What did she say?
She looked at him and said, "Owen, I don't love you for your pear tree. We could live in a van."
Oh, wow. That one sentence completely evaporated the darkness for him. It was the realization that her love was tied to him, to his spirit and his honor, not the material assets he had acquired to protect them.
The wizards could take the farm, but they couldn't take the covenant of his marriage.
It is a remarkable arc. We have watched him move from a nihilistic, fame-seeking Hollywood jester whose survival depended entirely on the fickle approval of executives and audiences, to a grounded steward of the earth.
He finds deep spiritual peace in localized, tangible reality. He finds stability amidst what he views as total institutional collapse.
But wait, let's pause there. Because finding spiritual peace on a farm did not somehow magically turn him into a trusting, serene monk who believes everything is fine.
Not at all.
His skepticism of mainstream narratives is as wild and aggressive as ever. Which brings us to my favorite, most absurd part of this entire transcript.
The pandas.
The pandas. We have to talk about the pandas. Because he firmly, with 100% conviction, believes that giant pandas do not exist.
He believes they are an elaborate Chinese hoax. He literally calls them wild Shih Tzu.
Well, Shih Tzus. He thinks they're just dogs painted black and white or guys in bear suits.
And he doesn't just throw this out as a joke. He has a whole litany of evidence he presents to support this theory.
Yes. Walk me through the panda truther evidence.
Okay, so he points out their biology makes no evolutionary sense. They're classified as bears, but they basically only eat bamboo, which provides almost zero nutritional value.
Right.
He points out how incredibly clumsy they are. Like videos always show them just rolling down hills or falling off playground equipment.
True, they do look ridiculous.
And he notes that they notoriously struggle to procreate in captivity, requiring absurd interventions by zookeepers.
He also claims they weren't depicted in ancient Chinese art or literature until the late 1800s, which he finds highly suspicious for a culturally iconic animal.
And the absolute kicker for him, China holds a strict patent on all of them worldwide. Every panda in every zoo is technically rented from the Chinese government.
I mean, I am laughing just thinking about it. It sounds completely insane to deny the existence of a bear you can literally watch on a live cam at the National Zoo.
But honestly, it perfectly encapsulates his entire worldview. The panda theory isn't really about bears, it's about his epistemological baseline.
Right. After being burned so profoundly by the institutions of media, entertainment, science, and government, his default setting is absolute, uncompromising distrust of anything mediated through a screen or an institution.
If the television tells him a panda is real, he assumes it's a spell.
He trusts nothing from a distance, but he trusts everything he can touch with his own two hands, the wood he chops, the classical piano keys he presses, his wife, his kids, his cows.
If he cannot interact with it directly in his physical, localized reality, he questions its existence, even if it's a panda.
If we synthesize this entire journey, Owen Benjamin's story serves as a startling microcosm of the modern crisis of meaning, truth, and institutional trust.
Whether a listener agrees with his conclusions, finds them profound, or finds them utterly absurd, the mechanisms he describes are worth examining.
The siloing of ideology, the debt traps that enforce corporate compliance, the manipulation of language to control emotion, these are real, powerful currents operating in our culture right now.
I completely agree.
And so, to you, the learner listening to this deep dive, we want to ask you to turn the lens inward for a moment. Look at your own life. Where might you be falling for wizardry?
What are the slogans or charged words, the sigils, that automatically dictate your emotional reactions before you even have a chance to think?
Are you caught in a debt loop that is forcing you to comply with things you fundamentally disagree with just to maintain a certain lifestyle?
Are there spells of despair in your life that you need to break through the simple physical acts of gratitude and toiling?
It's about doing the hard work to find what is truly tangible and real in your own life, moving beyond the screens, the algorithms, and the societal expectations that demand your compliance.
Which brings me to a final, somewhat provocative thought to leave you with.
A thought we haven't explicitly discussed yet, but it builds directly out of this source material. We started by talking about Benjamin as a jester.
Historically, the jester was the only person in the king's court who could tell the monarch the absolute unvarnished truth without being beheaded.
And they survived precisely because the truth was wrapped in a joke. Their biological and psychological function was to poke holes in our collective pride and relieve the societal pressure.
So here is the question. If our society continues to exile its jesters, if we demand that comedy becomes safe, sterile, and perfectly aligned with institutional ideology, what happens to a culture when that immense pressure has absolutely nowhere left to go?
History suggests that the pressure always finds a way out.
Right.
If it cannot escape through the relief valve of laughter, it usually erupts through something much darker.
And suddenly, the landscape of our culture becomes incredibly dangerous to navigate.
When you destroy the pressure relief valve of comedy, you don't cure the underlying tension of society. You just guarantee an eventual explosion. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.